doing today? Yeah?
Rock and roll.
There's some energy in here. I don't know. It feels. Was it the music? Can I pick? I don't know. Yeah, there's good vibes. There's good vibes. Welcome to Creative Mornings. See some familiar faces, see some new faces. For those who have not been here, we meet the third Friday of every month, either here at Orchard Street or somewhere else around town. And this is part of a worldwide organization, actually. So Creative Mornings was not created here in Columbia by any means. It was actually created in Brooklyn, New York. And now there are chapters all over the world, and we'll kind of hit on that in a little bit, but this is our little chapter. I don't know what that was. Yeah, a little sassy. I'm telling you, the energy in here, it's something's going on. Something's going on. So again, we're a group that meets once a month. People are meeting all over the world once a month. And every month there is a theme that all the chapters kind of like abide to. And this month's theme is trust. Very interesting topic for the times. Let's say that. But a chapter picks a theme for the month. This chapter is brought to us by the Islamabad chapter. And then the artwork is done by somebody in that chapter. And so this artwork was done by Ibrahim Nasir. So yeah, super cool stuff. We're super excited to be part of the organization. So to kind of get us in the mood of trust, I've got a little blurb I'm going to read, and then we're going to do a fun little icebreaker. So yeah, this is your first time here, we do those. So, trust is the invisible thread that weaves the fabric of our relationships and society together. But in turbulent times, doubt can unravel our strengths. So, go with your gut. Put your trust in a higher power, in our institutions, and in karma. Believe that people will do the right thing, trust the process, and that your creativity is a well that will never run dry. When we trust each other, we feel safe to share ideas, give feedback, and take risks. It requires vulnerability and willingness to be open to the possibilities of disappointment or betrayal. So, trust is not purely belief or faith, it is an active choice. Trust is a gift. It must be given before it can be earned. A lot there. So, on the topic of trust, I'm curious to hear from you all about a time where you said, you know what, I'm gonna trust my gut here. Either you're believing in yourself, or you're believing in an idea, you're believing in a piece of work you're putting together that maybe society, the outside world is telling you won't work. Yeah, let's talk about trusting ourselves. Can anybody give me a time when they said, hey, I'm gonna bet on me?
No.
Sure.
Okay, here we go.
All right. So I used to train horses, and I used to break horses, and there were a lot of times when I would work with stallions, and they're some of the most dangerous. So right before I would get on one, I had to trust my ability, and I had to trust them, and I had to trust my reading so that I would be safe.
Yeah. I imagine there's kind of like a trust you build with the horses as well. It's like you gotta look eye to eye.
You have to be able to read the situation and know when the time is right.
Yeah.
Because if it's not, you're gonna end up hurt.
Yeah. They could probably sense a lack of confidence, or like, hey, who's in charge here? They don't know over here. Yes.
So a year and a half ago, I walked away from a salaried position at my family's business to be a full-time artist.
Wow.
That's a huge step.
That's a huge step.
That's what we're here for. That's what Creative Mornings is here for. I remember somebody telling me, they come to this because, they work a 9-to-5 job, and this is the opportunity to kind of remind themselves, like, hey, I'm not just working, right? Like, there's more to me than just work. And I think anyone, especially folks that sit behind a desk quite a bit, you can kind of lose sight of that, So yeah, you gotta trust your gut. I love that. I love that. I guess I can say I've trusted my gut like the 18,000 hobbies I've tried to start. It's like I got this. And then you trust your gut. It's like no, I don't.
You might trust your gut, but maybe you don't trust your body.
Yeah. Your body just betrays you, or yeah, the mind's not quite there. I tried macrame like 6 different times. It's very peaceful, but when you don't have anything to show for it, it's kind of like, what are you doing? Anybody else?
I got one. I mean, it's a little bit more dark and depressing, but well, you know, I got out of an abusive relationship once upon a time.
Yes.
And when you're in it, especially an emotionally abusive relationship, or any abusive relationship for that matter, but especially when there's gaslighting and manipulation, it's really easy to not trust yourself across the board.
Yeah.
And so getting out, just knowing that I would be okay on one hand without him, but also thrive afterwards. That was
Yes.
100% good.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. It's you just get so tripped up and doubt yourself for no reason, and then you look back and you're like, wait, why did I not?
Yeah.
I know what I'm doing,
It takes
right?
a lot.
Yeah, come on. Awesome. Well, thank you all for sharing. We're gonna keep it moving. So, Orr Street. Want to give a shout out for Orr Street. That's where we are right now. Huge supporter of the community at large, but particularly the creative community. They're always doing events here. You can go on their Facebook, you can go on their website. Pretty much anytime you come by here, something's going on. And they allow us to do our events here free of charge. So huge shout out to Orr Street, huge supporter of Columbia. Also, would like to give a shout out to Sarah Carroll Jewelry, sponsors of Coffee and Donuts today. I'm actually sporting some jewelry right here. Awesome stuff. We've got QR codes here for the website. She's also on social media.
And we got her right here.
And she is here as well. But thank you very much for the
Thanks for the
donuts. So like I said, Creative Mornings is a worldwide organization. So there's 238 chapters to date, and there's a lot of people meeting right now, as a matter of fact. So you can see, well, not necessarily right now, because they're in different time zones. But you can see there's a lot of events going on July 19th today. We're on here somewhere, Montreal, and you can see these are like the number of people that have like RSVP'd for the event. So Detroit's on there. Here we are. Yeah. Right above NYC.
Yeah.
Oh, is it organized by count?
What's that?
Is it by count? RSVP count?
No, it's.
okay.
I think it's totally random. Yeah, I think it's totally random. I just screenshot this off the website. So yeah, I don't think there's any rhyme or reason to it. But it just goes to show. I mean, we got Phoenix meeting today. I guess that's San Francisco probably. Or wait, there's 2 Phoenixes. Oh, virtual. See, we always learn stuff from different chapters. Like, oh yeah, we should play this virtually. We're already recording it. So, Creative Mornings, our chapter, and every chapter is completely volunteer based. So if you are interested in helping out, whether that's helping with social media or finding partnerships or just coming in a little early and helping us set up, we can always use help. So you can reach out to us on Instagram or email columbia@creativemornings.com. And one of the biggest ways we grow our chapter, and I can tell that's what's happened today, is when people bring friends. So hopefully you leave here today feeling inspired, feeling at least like remotely excited for Friday and dealing with the trials and tribulations that are ahead of you. That's what we try to create here. We try to create a sense of community. We try to create a safe space that you feel supported when you leave here. So if that's the case, you should spread that feeling, right? So please bring friends. That's the best way we grow here, and a lot of people make new friends here as well. So really good opportunity to grow the chapter. Lastly, field trips. So this is something that Creative Mornings does. These are basically like virtual events. They do all sorts of stuff. They do sort of like learning opportunities where I think there was actually one recently on macrame, funny enough, where you can like get started to first steps to learn macrame. But then they also do more like businessy kind of stuff, like accounting stuff or like marketing stuff. So if you're looking to start a business, you're looking to blaze your own trail, something like that, highly recommend field trips. It's just creativemornings.com/field trips. Since all of you RSVP'd because you did, right? You all have accounts, so you can access all this stuff free of charge. So definitely recommend you check that out. Last thing we do, similar to the icebreaker, a little corny, but we read the Creative Mornings manifesto. It just helps you kind of get in the vibe for our speaker. So I need a volunteer to read our manifesto here.
Brave soldiers. Brave soldiers.
Ooh, here we go.
There we go.
I'm coming to you.
You just sing it though.
The voice
Oh, yeah.
Everyone is creative. Alright, from the diaphragm.
Everyone is creative. A creative life requires bravery and action, honesty and hard work. We are here to support you, celebrate with you, and encourage you to make the things you love. We believe in the power of community. We believe in giving a damn. We believe in face-to-face connections, in learning from others, in hugs and high fives. Yeah, we bring together people who are driven by passion and purpose, confident that they will inspire one another and inspire change in neighborhoods and cities around the world. Everyone is welcome.
Awesome. Okay, enough with me. You all are here for something very different. So I'm going to invite our volunteer Lauren up to introduce our speaker.
Right, hopefully I can see my phone here. Welcome, everybody, to Creative Mornings. It's a pleasure to introduce our guest and dive into the ever-important theme of trust. When our team received the themes for this year's series, this was like October of last year, we immediately knew who we wanted to invite to speak on this topic. And I have to admit that the excitement reverberated through our group chat when this person graciously accepted our invitation. And we really have been awaiting the day ever since. Our speaker is a public servant who has made a significant impact on our community right here in Boone County. As the county clerk, she oversees a multitude of responsibilities, but none perhaps as vital and sensitive as the management of our elections. I would also like to add that she has generously given up her time to be here today in the midst of preparing for a primary election that is just weeks away. Since her election in 2018, she has consistently demonstrated a deep commitment to upholding the integrity of our electoral process, ensuring fair and accessible elections for all Boone County residents. She's an advocate for transparency, innovation, and constant improvement in how we vote. This includes championing initiatives that expand voter access, such as weekend satellite voting, which earned Boone County national recognition. Her commitment to elections doesn't stop at our county lines. She is a co-founder of the award-winning podcast, High Turnout, Wide Margins, a platform that fosters collaboration and knowledge sharing among election officials across the nation. She's also a national advocate for the security and fair treatment of election workers. Today we'll hear her perspective on the role of trust in the election process, how we as voters, as election officials, and as a community build and maintain that trust, and how we ensure that every vote counts and every voice is heard. I have no doubt that her insights into these critical questions will be both enlightening and inspiring. Please join me in welcoming Brianna Lennon to Creative Mornings. That was like the nicest introduction. I'm so used to speaking in like Rotary groups and business groups and things like that, and I was so excited to get this invitation months and months ago. Like, this has been on my calendar for so long, and I've been so looking forward to it because obviously trust is exactly
what we are trying to strive for in elections. I can tell you at the association meetings that I go to and the conferences that I go to, the number one thing that we're all trying to achieve is building back some of the trust that we feel like has eroded in elections over the last 4 years, really more like 8 years. I think 2020 was really a point where everybody realized that things were going awry, but in the elections world, we started seeing it after the 2016 election. So it really just has been on the top of our minds as election administrators for a long time. But I feel like we are finally kind of zeroing in on some ways that we're trying to build it back and some ways that we're out there speaking to communities. And this is a great example of one because up until really 2021, 2022, I would talk to elections administrators, and I have no problem talking to people. It's one of the reasons we started a podcast. But a lot of elections administrators, and there's actually no set number of how many elections administrators there are in the United States. It is somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000. And the reason for that is because it's such a decentralized system that in Michigan and Wisconsin, elections are run at both the city and the county level. So you've got two sets of elections administrators in Wisconsin and Michigan, and so that drastically increases the number. But the vast majority of these 8 to 10,000 election administrators are in small communities. They're maybe the only one in their office. They're dealing with smaller communities of only a few thousand voters, and they are not taking those jobs because they are public speakers. They're taking those jobs because they just care about, running elections. They think it's interesting. They think it's a fun job. And all of this kind of attention has been thrust upon them. And so some of what we've been seeing is that over the past few years, more and more election officials have been stepping into the role of being comfortable, public speaking, talking to people, explaining how elections work, and kind of shedding some light on what I think most people thought of as kind of a black box of, I just show up and vote, and whatever happens before and after that is really none of my business. And now it's so important, I think, for people to understand how the process works. And we're seeing more people that are interested in how the process works. So I have this slide, which just has the cycle of an election. And I'm not really going to go too far into it because I don't want this to just be a talk about how elections work. I want it to be a more interesting one than that. But candidate filing, the creation of ballots, absentee voting, how we prepare and test our voting equipment, the election itself, and then post-election audit and certification. You can see the election itself is a very small part of the cycle of an election when it comes to what we're working on. So I have had it described, and I think it's very appropriate, so I can't take credit for how this is, but unlike another large event, a major event like a NASA launch or something like that, you can't scrub the launch of an election. Like, an election has to happen whether you are prepared for it or not, which means it has to be perfect whether you are comfortable with that concept or not, because people are looking for competency, they're looking for security, they're looking for integrity, and that's what we have to deliver. So it's a high bar, and I think it's something else that, as these last few years have shown, a lot of elections administrators really didn't think of it in that higher concept. They just thought, I'm here to do my job, I'm quietly competent, and I want to make sure that everybody has what they need to be able to vote, that we're following the laws we're supposed to be following, and now we're seeing that it's just as important to make sure that people have confidence in what it is that we are doing as elections administrators. So I like to start this out by saying that democracy really does run on the honor system. It's a little bit like, I think, the stock exchange. I mean, it has value because we say that it has value. Democracy works because we all believe that it works. And if we start losing faith in the concepts that make democracy happen, like free and fair elections, like that your vote matters, like that everything is done correctly and with integrity and accurately and securely, then we start to see democracy diminishing because people are not putting as much confidence into the system. I will tell a quick story. One of the best parts of working on our podcast. So high turnout, wide margins, it's called that because that's our little unofficial election administrator prayer before election day. We all want high turnout, but we also want wide margins. So we called it that because it is a podcast that is a little of that for us, by us. It's very in the weeds. It's not something, I would say some episodes are very good for public consumption. A lot of them are just like, oh, you have a better way of doing your inventory for your voting equipment? Let's talk about it. But one of the great things that we were able to do as part of the podcast is travel to Eastern Europe. And we spent 10 days in a combination of Moldova, and then we went to Hungary. And in Hungary there was a conference, I think it was the Association of Eastern and Central European election officials. And they were, at the time that we went, it was 2021, 2022, the Ukrainian invasion had been top of mind for people. It had just been happening. It was still very active. Moldova is actually on the border, and so there were a lot of good conversations that we had with folks that lived there about their election system. And then we also, in the association, that conference was primarily, it was the first time they had met in several years, because after the invasion they had disbanded because they couldn't figure out a way to have basically democracies that were crumbling be in the same room with democracies that were still trying to be positive pro-democracy countries. So this was kind of like their, what are we going to do now? So we had the opportunity to speak to, in particular, what stuck in my mind was an individual that he is, I guess you would call the election director in waiting for Belarus. Because though they had a free and fair election, they are under a dictatorship right now. And when the woman won in that election, she was immediately exiled, and he also was exiled. So at the time we talked to him, he's 31 years old. He's been doing international elections observation for years and years. He has to live in Poland with his wife and his kid, and he's just waiting to see if he's going to be able to run elections in Hungary. And so far he can't, or in Belarus, and so far he can't. So we thought, well, let's talk to him about how the Belarusian system works and how elections work and what's happened and everything. And at the end, my co-host and I are both election administrators. We're taking this very cerebrally, talking about the ins and outs of things. And we have a producer that's with us who is a journalist. And at the end, she was just like, can we just ask, like, why do you keep doing this? Like, you could do any number of other things. You do not have to be in the middle of this fight. You have like a 1-year-old, and you're living far away from the rest of your family. And he just said, I mean, if we're not fighting for democracy, what are we doing? Like, I believe in better for our country. I believe that democracy is the way to get there. And I'm part of it. I have to be able to do this. And he just said it so casually, like that was just a thing. It was very core to him, and that's what it was. And to hear all of that, and then come back here, and it has stuck with me as we're dealing with what we are dealing with domestically, that it really isn't, I mean, in I guess a morbid way, it's really not that unique in the international world, but it also means that there's a lot of hope, and there's still a lot of people that have confidence in our system and in the concept of democracy, and that they trust that democracy is still the way to make the most equitable, inclusive, best community that we can have. And so it is one of the things that keeps me going, is remembering that even when things are so bad in other places, and even when we feel like they're so bad, there's still that kind of string that ties us all together, and that's that faith in democracy and that our community can be better. And one of the ways I think that we have sort of undersold in our democracy why we should trust in what we're doing in our elections is that it's really people-based. It's our community that is running elections. It's not this like third party that comes in and runs in elections and leaves. Election workers, elections administrators are our friends and neighbors. That's one of the huge advantages that we have of having local elections and county-run elections is that people are the backbone of the election. We can't do it without them. There are some poll workers in here who I won't name because I don't want to call anybody out, but they are the reason why our elections work. We can do everything that we can do to make sure that people get registered to vote in our office. We can make sure that we can run, we can get the ballots ready. We can contact all the polling places and make sure that they're set to go. But if we don't have election workers show up on election day, there's no voting. And I think people really need to recognize that it is friends and neighbors that are making democracy happen, and that you can also be a part of democracy by being part of the election. It is not a gate-kept thing. It is something that involves all of us. And all of those higher level things, like the fact that we have a constitutional right to vote, the fact that we have a democracy, you get to help with that and assist voters exercising those. And I think that's also, if you talk to anybody that has worked in election before, one of the reasons why they keep coming back, because it is a heavy responsibility, but it's also a joyous responsibility. People get a lot of satisfaction and joy out of helping their friends and neighbors cast their ballot and vote. And then even beyond that, the fact that we have all of these people involved is one of the reasons why we should have trust and confidence in our election process, because it's so decentralized. And it's one of the reasons why when people say, this doesn't make any sense, that every city does something different and every county does something different and there's different rules in different states, and this is why we have so many conspiracy theories, because Georgia's doing it one way and Michigan's doing it another way. It's that decentralization that makes sure that we have integrity in the system. No one thing can break down the election, because it can still happen in different places, and we still have people that are able to cast their ballots. So we saw that, I think, a lot in COVID, where we had to do a lot of changes to the process. The irony for me of COVID is that a lot of those changes in the process that we made locally, we got to keep, and probably wouldn't have happened unless we were forced to do those things, and they were positive things. The fact that we have weekend absentee voting is only because we learned that we could do it by having to do it during COVID. So there's a lot of innovation in it, but it's because of people thinking about ways to continually help our community. We didn't have to do weekend voting in COVID. We didn't have to do open air tents in COVID. There were election offices that just kind of stayed closed and said, if you want to mail in your absentee ballot, that's fine. But we're not going to do really anything more than that, because that's all that we're statutorily required to do. My personal belief is that trust improves when we show that we are interested in getting more people involved in the process, and so that's what we strive for. And I'm seeing more and more offices do that. One of the things that I get to see with the podcast, which is really great, is when we're talking to these other counties and these other election officials, we are sharing these ideas, and they're taking these ideas and going home and implementing them. The fact that we have weekend absentee voting, I've seen more offices start to do it, because sometimes there's just fear that it's not possible, or that, well, they can do that there, but that wouldn't work here, our community wouldn't want it, and they try it and they find out how positive it is. And I think it helps get people outside of their comfort zones to have these conversations. So the more that we talk about elections as a people-run process, that democracy is really a community event and a community exercise, I think the better that we can build trust and confidence back in our process. So I'm going to get hyper-local and just talk about things that are related. I needed to put in something about the upcoming election. So August 6th is our primary election. A lot of voters, I think, are not necessarily aware that we have a primary election coming up, partly because there was some confusion about when we went to a caucus system for the presidential preference selection process. They thought that maybe that meant that we don't have primaries here anymore, and we absolutely still have primaries. Primaries for the August election are as far down as the county sheriff has a primary, all the way up to U.S. Senate has a primary. So every federal, state, and county office that had more than one person file from a political party has a primary. So they are just as important as November. We are an open primary state, which means that you do not have to pick your party in advance. You're not locked into a particular party, and we also don't track your party. So whatever party style ballot you pick on election day, we don't care. It doesn't go in your record. We don't keep a record of it for the next election or anything like that. But it does mean that you do have to pick one party style ballot. So lots of folks come in and say, well, I've got friends that are running as a Democrat, and I want to know, I also want to get involved in what's happening on the Republican side, and I also have this neighbor that's a libertarian, and I wanted to vote on that one too. You just have to pick one. And when the nominations are done, then everyone will have the chance to vote in November, but this is really the nomination process. Today's talk was perfect timing because next Tuesday is the start of no excuse absentee voting, which is another really great thing that we got through, I think through COVID. We proved to people, there was clerks and local election authorities in Missouri had been advocating for years that we wanted to have a no excuse option for in-person absentee voting, which is a very wonky way of saying early voting, but it's not early voting because the difference is that in early voting, sometimes you can get the results on a rolling basis. In-person absentee voting operates exactly like early voting. You don't have to sign up in advance, you come in person, you get checked in, you cast your ballot, it's just like on election day. But we kept meeting resistance from policymakers because they just didn't really see it as important. And after we kind of proved to them during COVID that we could do in-person absentee voting and it wasn't the end of the world and things didn't fall apart, they were gracious enough to give us 2 weeks of no excuse absentee voting. And that has been a lifesaver because one of the reasons the COVID general election went so well was because so many people cast their ballots in advance. We had 70% turnout in Boone County, which was amazing, in November of 2020. And 30% of that 70% were early voters.
Wow.
So it was half and half people that mailed it in and people that came in person, but 14,000 people came through the government center or one of our weekend opportunities to cast a no excuse absentee ballot.
Good job, Columbia.
Yes, Boone County was fantastic and showed up for that kind of stuff. And having that 30% turnout, when I talk about how you can't scrub the launch and you have to do it and it has to be perfect, taking the pressure off of polling places, especially during a pandemic, was, I wouldn't even say like a benefit, it was a necessity that we needed to do that. Otherwise, it would have been a much harder election. And I would try to remind people that because there is still, I think, a lot of people that want to vote on election day. They like the feeling of voting on election day. And it doesn't feel as magical, I will admit. When you come in to vote on a random Thursday, you still get your I voted sticker, you still cast your ballot, but then there's a little bit of a letdown, like, well, the election's not even until 2 weeks from now. But it really does, it helps us to plan things out, but it also, I think, helps to make sure that it starts conversations between people because then, you know, your friend might see your I voted sticker and be like, wait, is it election day? Am I supposed to be voting today? And then you can educate them about no excuse absentee voting and tell them about how easy it was because there's never any lines and it's very quick. And one of the other big benefits, I think, for voters that they sometimes underestimate is if you go in on election day and you have changed apartments or you've moved and you forgot to do that, when you are standing in a line on election election day. You get to the front, and you're like, okay, finally I can do this. And then the poll worker turns the poll pad around and says, is this your address? And you go, no. You gotta get out of line, you gotta get your address updated, then you gotta do it again. If that happens during no excuse absentee voting, you're dealing with our office, and we do it real fast. And we get you updated, and anything that might have been something that tripped you up on election day, we can deal with beforehand. So it makes it that much easier, because then people have a much smoother process, and they're having a higher level of satisfaction when they do vote. And we do see, there's plenty of studies that show that if you have a bad experience the first time that you vote, you are very unlikely to vote again. Because there's already people that think, you know, they're nervous, they're intimidated, they don't feel comfortable, they don't feel like they're smart enough. And if we add in one more obstacle, like having to change their address, like asking them if they have the right ID and them not knowing if they do or not, that those individuals are not gonna come back and vote again. So no excuse absentee voting, as weird as it is, it helps those things. It helps improve people's confidence in their ability to cast a ballot. As I said, with the COVID innovations that we've had, we still do weekend voting. I will say the one at the Columbia Mall has been probably the most popular. People love voting at the mall. I think it's super fun. I work all of these, we have election judges, and then I go to all of them too. A, because I deliver equipment, but B, because it's just really fun. People are always in a good mood, and it's just like a neat way. I mean, nobody ever expects to go vote at the mall, really. So you get like mall walkers that just stop in and are like, I can vote today? Yeah, it's great. Tell your friends. So we're at the Columbia Mall, we're at Douglas High School, and then we also go to the Southern Boone Library and Centralia Public Library. And I am hopeful that as we continue to do things, every election we hear from more and more people that say, oh, I had no idea that this was available. I had no idea that no excuse absentee didn't require signing up in advance or having something special or having an application. You just show up and we will get you checked in. So these are all opportunities that you can have even before you get to election day to cast your ballot and you know, improve confidence in your own circles by talking about how easy it was and encouraging them to get more involved. It also, I think, encourages you to research your ballot a little earlier, which is always tricky because lots of times there's not a lot of information, especially on hyper-local things. Amendments are always really hard to read. That's the number one thing that we hear from people is that the amendments don't make any sense, and I wish I could make them make sense. They're written by the legislature and or the Secretary of State's office, and there's very little that I can do about that. Yep. But you have the opportunity to have those conversations and do research, read the news and things like that. And I think, you know, we advocated as clerks for 6 weeks of no excuse absentee voting. But what we're seeing is in the 4 weeks that go, we still have regular absentee voting. If you're gonna be out of town, if you have an illness or you're a caretaker, you can still vote 6 weeks before election day if you want to. But most people don't feel like they're ready to make their decision until about 2 weeks before election day. So it's kind of hit that sweet spot. We still advocate, I would say, like legislatively, the clerks still try to push for 6 weeks. But realistically, I think community behavior is that 2 weeks is a pretty good amount of time. I know that I have 10 minutes left. I have my contact information up here, but I also just kind of wanted to put out into the crowd here, if you have any thoughts about how trust in our elections, any personal experience that you may have had or anything that you think could improve on it, because there's been studies for years and years, very similar to the way that people say, oh, I like my congressperson, but I hate Congress. There's a lot of trust in local elections. A lot of county clerks still have a great deal of trust from their communities, but those same people that say, well, yeah, I know that everything's good here, but I don't know what's happening over there, and so those national results, I just don't believe. And I think for a lot of years, clerks have been kind of trained or just found it easiest to give an answer of, well, that's great, let me tell you how we do things here, and but I can't speak to that, I don't know, things could be going crazy over there, I have no idea. We are trying to get elections administrators to kind of stand up for each other, and that doesn't mean that we have to, fight to the death that so-and-so elections administrator in Georgia did everything correctly. We don't know if they did or not. But what we can say is the basic processes and checks and balance and chain of custody and all of those guardrails that exist in our county also exist in the statutes and the practices and processes of other places. And then I talk to people from other states and I know what they're doing. And so even though their structure is different and they're a completely mail-in state, that doesn't mean that it's no holds barred, anybody gets a ballot, anybody can cast it. There are plenty of things that prevent, terrible things from happening. And I have confidence because I'm talking to these other elections administrators that they care just as much about having integrity in their elections as we do in ours. So just kind of wanted to open it up a little bit and see what people's thoughts were, because I know that elections are a hot topic and people feel very strongly about them.
I have a question. Okay, so I know in Columbia I've always been super impressed. There's never a line, there was a line like for the presidential election or whatever.
And there probably will be
excited.
this year.
Of course, because certain days people are excited, but for the most part it seems like it runs amazingly smoothly. Like it's so easy here. And then I see on the news, like in certain cities, there are these lines around the block and people are waiting forever and now you can't give them water and it's like all this stuff. Do you think that's a deliberate attempt to disenfranchise certain populations in certain places, or just incompetence, or what is happening?
So I think it's a combination of things. One is that a lot of the communities where you'll see that happen are resource starved. And that goes all the way down to elections administrators. And so if a board of elections isn't given the resources they need from their county government or their city government or their state, for example, we are not guaranteed state funding. Everything that we do in Boone County is Boone County taxpayer money. So if the county commission decided that I didn't need the budget that I have, then we would have the same problem. So much of what we do is because we have the support of our county commission budgetarily. So some of it's that. Some of it is that I think that there is some media literacy issues where, like, you look in Georgia, all those lines happen during early voting. And then there are no lines on election day because everybody wanted to do early voting, which is optional. So all those lines, if the people got out, would still be able to come back the next day and vote. And we see that in, I think, DC had the same thing, and I have talked to people that vote in those places too, and they prefer to have those options. And when you talk to the voters themselves, sometimes they're like, yeah, we take the risk of standing in line those days, and that's okay. We're not mad about it. When those lines happen on election day, I would say part of that is resource. Some resource may be that they didn't train their poll workers to the extent that they wanted to. Sometimes they have a lack of poll workers, and so they can't open as many precincts as they would like to. And then sometimes just the general structure of their state law really does, I think people don't know all of the unintended consequences of some of these things. And I think you see the same thing when you start seeing narratives of, well, those votes are being counted and they came in after the deadline. Like, yeah, in Missouri we do have a deadline that all absentee ballots have to be in by election day, and we are not allowed to cure them. We're not allowed to call a person that didn't sign their absentee ballot envelope and have them come in and sign them. There are a lot of states, like Georgia, like Michigan, that allow voters to come in and fix their mistake on their envelope, not on their ballot, but on their envelope so that it can be counted. There's also a lot of states that have a postmark deadline instead of in-office deadline. And all of those structures, in Michigan, for example, they did all of those things, but then in a really big oversight, told them that they weren't allowed to start processing their absentee ballots until election day. So I get to start processing my absentee ballots, as few as they are, on the Thursday before an election. So by the time we get to election day, they're already out of their envelopes. We know whether they're gonna count or not. They just haven't been tabulated. So all we do is run them through the machine on election day. They're not even starting to open their envelopes until election day. So all of those statutory limitations can have a huge impact on things too. And I think when, because so much of the news is nationalized, when you hear about those and there's no real media literacy of context of, this is because this law looks like this, or hey, did you know that this county only gets X amount of dollars from the state? It can look like everything is falling apart, but it's actually totally explainable.
So this is a two-part question. The first one's just really quick. Is your position elected, and is it
Yes.
partisan election or
Yes.
nonpartisan? Okay. So going back to what you said about other people writing the ballot language, those positions are partisan elections, and I think that plays a lot into people's trust, knowing that people with an agenda, a very publicly stated agenda, are writing these things, and the division that we've been experiencing seems to be, much worse in recent years than it has been previously, or maybe I'm just more aware of it. Is there anything from your role and all of the people that you communicate with that might be a remedy to that?
Yeah, so that is a great question. I think that's one of the things that people are grappling with in the election administrator world, because although mine is elected and mine is partisan elected, there are states that have like a 3-member board with a hired nonpartisan election director. That's in a lot of places. Even in Missouri, in the more urban areas, in St. Louis, Kansas City, St. Louis County, Jackson County, they have a bipartisan election board appointed by the governor, who hire a Republican and a Democratic election director to offset everything. And then their entire office, when they hire people, are required to be Democrats or Republicans. We don't have those requirements on us in county offices. So I think that there's a lot of variation in how people get into these roles, and there are even some state level secretaries of state that are appointed by the governor instead of elected themselves. So there are states that other people have looked at. I will say, my remedy for things, this is not an ideal remedy for things, but it's, if you are going to touch elections in any way, if you are a higher up, county clerks, you can't really hire a bunch of county clerks that already have experience. County clerks serve their community, they can come from anywhere. One of the best county clerks I know used to be a hairdresser before they became a clerk. That's the way that elections works. Everybody comes into it in a different way. But if you're going to be the state election official, I would prefer that somebody had election experience.
Yes.
Because the best secretaries of state that I've seen that have been fair and nonpartisan / bipartisan have been ones that started as county clerks and then just basically got promoted into the role. Anybody that is coming in that is using it as a stepping stone, obviously going to treat it way more politically. So I would think one of the best ways that we could help, especially with the statewide ones, who are the ones that have the ability to write the ballot language, is by putting in some qualifications. Because right now there are no qualifications that you need to meet in order to be Secretary of State.
Are there any checks and balances on that language?
So in Missouri, it is created by the Secretary of State and checked by the Attorney General's office. So it is in theory. Yeah, and then there's a fiscal note attached to every ballot amendment that is written by the state auditor. So it is 3 agencies that are working together. And we did see recently, like in the past 6 months, those 3 not get along and bring each other to court. And the state auditor's office won.
So the court only gets involved with the input of those 3?
The court gets involved if So like if the AG's office decides not to approve ballot language, the Secretary of State's office can sue the AG and say, I think that you should approve this and bring them into court. Or what happens most of the time is that the person or the advocacy group that is putting forth the ballot amendment that like really wants to circulate petition signatures and things like that, they will sue and say that the ballot language was unfair. But if they can't get along to even write the ballot language, which is what happened in this case, then yeah, they go into court and the court decides like who was being reasonable and who wasn't. Yes.
This might not really be like in your role, but one thing that I think of and am often frustrated by is lack of election participation among younger people. I was one of those lucky kids who like my parents took me when they went voting, and so I wonder like, can the county or your office or like what do you do like high school outreach, like voter registration stuff? Like I just wonder how to get people more engaged younger.
Yes, so we do, and the League of Women Voters also does a lot of really good youth outreach. We go to high schools to register them. We also do mock elections. So one of the best things that we just did last year was, and a lot of it's dependent on how much we can do a partnership with a school. Douglas High School, for example, basically made a curriculum, had kids write their own ballot language, write the questions that they wanted to vote on, have conversations, nominate poll workers. People decided to be poll workers, and then they put on the election and we facilitated it. We brought the equipment there, we printed their ballots for them, and then told, kind of gave them a little training about what they were gonna do. But they checked in each other, they voted, and we heard people say things like, that was way easier than I thought that was gonna be. I feel so grown up. Like it was a very, very positive experience, and so we really love doing those things. What I will say when I talked to, we worked with the Truman School of Public Affairs, and they did a survey of their political science entry level. So like everybody had to take it, whether they're a poli-sci major or not, about what influenced them to register to vote. We didn't go as far as actually voting, but just like starting the process, and number one was their parents. So some of it really is that like if you come from an involved family, then you're going to probably also be involved. But I think too, a lot of what people hear in the news is like, well, my vote doesn't count, and it makes it hard to get each other registered. Like they're not influencing each other to get registered. And to that, what I say, my favorite thing that I ever heard somebody say as a retort to, well, my vote doesn't count and elections don't matter, is, well, we've never tried. Our participation is so low that you can't really say that elections don't matter because we've never had full participation. And I've told people, if you think in terms of registration that we've got, let's say 80%, and it's not 80%, but 80% of our eligible population registered to vote. And then you look at an April election where 13% of people turn out to vote. That means 87% of 50% of people did not choose to get involved in local elections. So how can we say, really, that the city council race, it doesn't matter because city council's gonna do what it wants? Well, that's because they're only elected by that small of a group. So that's my new thing when I talk to people about like, well, it doesn't matter. I'm like, well, we haven't tried, but if we did try, maybe it would matter.
I want to start using that too.
Yeah.
You said there's not really a interstate national threat to elections as far as you know, but things that are interstate, like paper suppliers, equipment manufacturers, even legislative councils and like Eric and such.
Yeah.
How do you know to trust them, and how do you know that they won't be a place that could cause system-wide failure?
That is a great question. And yeah, that is something that we've been grappling with too. The fact that so much of the nuts and bolts of elections does require vendor participation. We need to have vendors that do voting equipment, we need to have paper suppliers, and we had a paper shortage, we still have a paper shortage. We have printers that print our ballots, and if something goes wrong with those things, then what does that mean? Because you can't run an election without paper either. Partly, I would say, we have seen a big investment from pretty much every vendor in coming to our association meetings, in participating in our tabletop exercises, that they know that they are a part of the process too, and a bigger number, I think, of election officials, when they contract with a new vendor, have been holding them to a higher standard and requiring them to go through cybersecurity audits and requiring them to have certain security protocols so that they have redundancies and backups for things like that. So a lot of it's still on local election officials to hold them accountable, to make sure that whatever they're producing, and this is part of the system too, if ballots are printed incorrectly, in Missouri especially, but in most of the places that have to do testing on their voting equipment, everybody has to do some form of testing. What we do is, when we get the ballots in from our printer, is we take a couple from every single stack of ballots that we get that are gonna go to every polling place, and we run them through the machines to make sure that they count properly. So we're testing what we get from our vendors before we put them out into the world. And that kind of check and balance on our vendors is one of the ways I think that we try to stem that from happening. I'm not gonna say that if there was such a terrible paper shortage, or like an envelope shortage, the vote by mail states had an envelope shortage, and they really had to kind of get creative in some places. Those are definitely places where we're vulnerable, and we're starting to see state legislation pick up on that, federal scrutiny on some vendors more, and like constructive scrutiny. I think we've seen, there's been conspiracy theories about particular vendors that have been trying to kind of just paint everybody with a brush and say, if you do voting equipment, then you are already corrupt. Like, that's not helpful. but to say, at the federal level, we have voluntary voting system guidelines that every vendor has to adhere to, and then the fact that they're voluntary means they don't have to do it, but if we as local election officials or state officials say, we're not gonna allow that equipment in our state unless you have complied with the voluntary voting system guidelines, then we can hold them to that standard, and that's helpful as well.
Are there any voting practices that you've seen elsewhere that you would like to implement here, other than that 6-week early voting?
So one we're kind of piloting in August, which I'm really excited about. So one of the things that has been very helpful, I think, for giving people confidence, because they can have their ballot style available, like the vote center model that a lot of people are moving to. In order to successfully do a vote center model, you have to be able to provide every ballot style at that place. And if you look at this election, for example, we've got 102 different ballot styles and then 4 different parties of that. So it would be pretty much impossible to provide pre-printed ballots for everybody. And we've got central polling locations, so what were we going to do? And the solution to that is ballot on demand. And we have places all over the country that are utilizing ballot on demand. St. Louis County does ballot on demand. Ballot on demand allows you to do things like what St. Louis County is doing, vote anywhere. You don't have to vote at your assigned polling place in St. Louis County, because every polling place has your ballot style, because they have a printer. So we have, in the last 3 months, purchased 15 printers, and our central polling locations, and if you come to vote absentee in our office, or at one of our weekend locations, your ballot will be printed on demand for you. And that helps voters have more confidence. What it also does down the line, because everything in the cycle is linked to another one, is now, I don't know how granular people get into election results unless you're working on a campaign, But if you looked at all of our results, there was always a catch-all called absentee, a catch-all called Central 1, Central 2, and Central 3. Those are now going to be columns. So we have all the granular level of, 2C and 2G are at one poll. Here's the results. Here's a column for the election day results. Here's a column for the absentee results. Here's a column for the central results. And so people will be able to see all that granular level detail, and I think that will help too. But that was an investment for us to do, and something that cost $100,000 for us to do, and ongoing costs of the licensing and all of that of the equipment to do it. So I'm hopeful that we basically stole that idea from St. Louis County, and I think that it'll be a really positive one here. That's great.
That was great.
Thank you.
That was great. So
Great.
informative. We recorded this and we will post the recording, and so please share with folks. Shared some great dates here that I took pictures of, and I will be sharing. So if you'd like to snag a quick pic. Next month, really quick, I just wanted to let you all know we are moving locations for next month. So next month we will be at the Mont Mini, which is at the Boone County Historical Society off 63. Hopefully you all are familiar with it. We'll be sharing a lot of information. We've got Nancy Elliott, who's actually for next month's theme, which is ritual. So look forward to seeing you all then. Thanks for coming out.
Thanks.